North Carolina.
Mr. Attorney General, you're the only person who could ensure that Mr. Weiss had all the necessary authority, aren't you?
I'm the only person who can sign an agreement with respect to special counsel. The authority to do Section 515 can be signed by other people in the department.
You're aware, ultimately, though, the authority is yours.
Yes.
You made the point that you don't take orders from the president about such things. You decide, ultimately, what the Justice Department will do.
I announced at the beginning, I promised that he would be able to bring whatever cases he wants, and I have followed through on that promise. I'm permitted to make that kind of promise, and I have made it.
Did you undertake to inform yourself, to interact with him sufficient to ensure that he knew he possessed that authority, or that you would see to it that he had all necessary
I
authority?
don't think there's any doubt that he knew. He has written 3 letters to this committee indicating that he understood he had that authority.
You're also aware, though, aren't you, sir, that a senior IRS investigator, whistleblower, came forward and testified publicly that Mr. Weiss stated that he did not have such authority. He was not the decider. Are you aware of that?
I'm aware of the testimony. I was not present at any point during that statement. And Mr. Weiss, who was present, has indicated that he had the authority and he knew that he had it.
Subsequent to those developments, though, you decided to make Mr. Weiss special counsel, which you had not done before.
Mr. Weiss made clear he did not ask me to be special counsel until last month, and last month I made him special counsel.
Did you have some lack of information that you should have had that would have caused you to act earlier to make him special counsel?
Mr. Weiss did not ask to be special counsel before.
I understand he didn't ask. You've said that, sir. Did you take the necessary steps to inform yourself what authority he understood he had or what obstacles he was encountering?
Look, Mr. Weiss had, as I said from the beginning, at the very beginning, that he had authority over all matters that pertain to Hunter Biden.
Have you learned that he was in fact deterred by decisions of the United States attorneys in the District of Columbia and the Northern District of California from proceeding as he thought best?
With respect, Congressman, Mr. Weiss has not said that he was deterred. He said that he followed the normal processes of the department, and that he was never denied the ability to bring a case in another jurisdiction.
Well, what changed then, Mr. Attorney General? What made you decide that it was sufficient to leave him in the situation he was until you decided to make him special counsel?
Mr. Weiss asked for that authority, given the extraordinary circumstances of this matter, and given my promise that I would give him any resources he requested, I made him special counsel.
So until that time, was it just a matter of his predilection, or did you undertake to investigate and discern what he was doing with his authority and whether he had faced any obstacles?
I did not endeavor to investigate because I had promised that I would not interfere with this investigation. The way to not interfere is to not investigate an investigation.
That he requested to be named special counsel, having not done so over months and months of your tenure, did you ask him what had changed that made him now need to be a special counsel?
Mr. Weiss asked to be made special counsel. I had promised that I would give him all the resources he needed, and I made him special counsel.
When did the Justice Department permit statutes of limitations to expire on some of the prospective charges against Hunter Biden for tax violations?
I don't know anything about the statute of limitations here. The investigation was in the hands of Mr. Weiss to make the determinations that he thought were appropriate.
Are you unaware that statutes of limitations have in fact been allowed to expire after there having been tolling agreements in place?
I'm going to say again, the determination of where to bring cases and which kinds of cases to bring was left to Mr. Weiss.
Yes, sir. I understand that you've said that. That's part of the problem. The question is, are you aware that statutes of limitations have been allowed to expire while the matter was under investigation?
The investigators were fully familiar with all the relevant law.
I'm not asking for the excuses. I'm asking whether you're aware of that fact, sir.
I'm going to say again, I'm going to say again and again if necessary, I did not interfere with, did not investigate, did not
See,
make
those are
determinations.
statements in response to other questions. Everybody in the country now knows, who's paying attention to this, that the Justice Department permitted statutes of limitations to expire. Every lawyer who's ever practiced understands the implications of allowing statutes of limitations to expire. Do you not even know, as you sit here, whether that occurred or not?
Prosecutors make appropriate determinations on their own. In this case, I left it to Mr. Weiss whether to bring charges or not. That would include whether to let statute of limitations expire or not, whether there was sufficient evidence to bring a case that was subject to the statute of limitations or not, whether there were better cases to bring or not.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Attorney General, for being here with us this morning. You know, as much as we see dirt being thrown in the air, there's a lot of misinformation that I think is intended to confuse people. I would like to ask unanimous consent to put into the record 3 letters from Mr. Weiss that he sent to Congress on June 7th, June 30th, and July 10th.
Without objection.
He said over and over again that he has full authority over this case, including the ability to seek special counsel or special attorney status if needed. You know, trying to imply otherwise is just simply false. Mr. Weiss was appointed by then President Trump. Your decision was to leave the Trump-appointed attorney completely in charge of this, hands off from you. He makes all the calls without interference from the Attorney General. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And so the idea that you would interfere is completely wrong. And I'd also like to ask, you talked about your independence from the president, but also your independence from the Congress. Have you ever come across historically an instance where the Congress of the United States tried to or successfully interfered with a prosecution initiated by the Department of Justice based on the facts and the law?
I want to be gentle about the word interfere, but it is, just as a historical example, in the case of Iran-Contra, the consequences of actions by the Congress were that the special counsel's investigation of Iran, Mr. North, were dismissed.
Correct. Before I go into another question I have, I just would like unanimous consent to put into the record the annual statistical transparency report dated April of 2023. It indicates that the deduplicated counting method for FBI queries of U.S. persons under the Section 702 database numbered over 119,000. I would just like to note, and we will work with you, this committee on a bipartisan basis is very concerned about querying of the 702 database for U.S. persons without a warrant. We're not suggesting that the law does not permit that, but we are going to visit this issue because it is my view that querying the 702 database that has been collected without due process, because it relates to foreign individuals, is completely wrong in terms of the privacy rights of Americans. And I'm hoping that we can work successfully with you as we craft requirements for a warrant to do that querying. I'd like to ask, you know, as we know, and has been mentioned by the ranking member, the proposal is basically to defund the police by the Republicans, to defund the FBI. I am concerned that if we defund the police, as the majority has suggested, that really doesn't have an impact on the statute of limitations. So if we were to defund the Department of Justice, defund the FBI and the police, as has been suggested, what would happen with the statute of limitations for cases that you were pursuing if you were not able to actually do that? Would they be suspended anyway, or would the criminals get off scot-free?
Well, I know in my experience as a judge, if I was asked a legal question and I don't know the answer, I would go back to the office and study it, and I'll have to do that in this case. I don't have the answer.
Well, I think I do, because there's nothing in the statute that allows for the statute of limitations to be suspended because the government has been shut down or because the police have been defunded through the budget process. And I just think we ought to take the implications of a shutdown very seriously in terms of allowing criminals to get off. And I see that my time has expired, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair does not recognize himself. Quote, Mr. Weiss has full authority to bring cases in other jurisdictions if he feels it's necessary. That was your response, Attorney General, to Senator Grassley's question on March 1st, 2023. You just referenced it when Mr. Bishop was questioning you. Only problem is he'd already been turned down by the U.S. Attorney in the District of Columbia, Mr. Graves. So he didn't have full authority, did he?
I had an extended conversation with Senator Grassley at the time. We briefly touched on the Section 515 question and how that process went. I've never been suggested.
My point's real simple, Mr. Garland. You said he had complete authority, but he'd already been turned down. He wanted to bring an action in the District of Columbia, and the U.S. Attorney there said, no, you can't. And then you go tell the United States Senate under oath that he has complete authority.
I'm going to say again that no one had the authority to turn him down. They could refuse to partner with him. They could not.
You can use whatever language. Refuse to partner is turning down.
Well, it's not the same under a well-known Justice Department practice.
Here's why the statute of limitations question is important, and Mr. Bishop was getting at just a few minutes ago. Here's why it's important. You let the statute of limitations lapse for 2014, 2015. Those were the years with the felony tax charges where Hunter Biden was getting income from Burisma. Here are 4 facts that I think are so important. Hunter Biden was put on the board of Burisma, made a lot of money, got paid a lot of money over those years, a couple $1 million. He wasn't qualified. Fact number 2, he wasn't qualified to be on the board of Burisma. Not my words, his words. He said he got on the board because of his last name. The brand, as Devin Archer said when he was under oath and we deposed him. Fact number 3, Burisma executives told Hunter Biden, we're under pressure, we need help. Fact number 4, Joe Biden goes to Ukraine, leverages our tax money, American people's tax money, to get the prosecutor fired who was applying the pressure. Interestingly enough, that fact is entirely consistent with what the confidential human source told the FBI, and they recorded in the 1023 form. The same form Mr. Wray didn't want to let this committee and the Congress see. That all happened. That all happened. And what I'm wondering is why you guys let the statute of limitations lapse for those tax years that dealt with Burisma income.
There's one more fact that's important, and that is that this investigation was being conducted by Mr. Weiss, an appointee of President Trump. You will, at the appropriate time, have the opportunity to ask Mr. Weiss that question, and he will no doubt address it in the public report that will be transmitted to the Congress. I don't know the answer to those questions.
Did they forget? Did the lawyers just like let it, did they just like, oh, darn, we let it, were they careless? I
expect that won't be what he says, but because I
You know that's not the case, because as Mr. Bishop pointed out, they had a tolling agreement. They talked to Hunter Biden's defense counsel and say, let's extend the statute of limitations. And then at some point, they made an intentional decision to say, we're going to let the statute of limitations lapse. And I want to know who decided that and why they did it.
Mr. Weiss was a supervisor of the investigation at that time and at all times. He made the appropriate decisions, and you'll be able to ask him that question, and he will. You
know why they did it. Everyone knows why they did it. May not say it, but everyone knows why they did it. They didn't. Burisma, those tax years, that dealt with that involved the president. It's one thing to have a gun charge in Delaware. That doesn't involve the president of the United States. But Burisma, oh my, that goes right to the White House. We can't have that. And we can slow walk this thing along. We can even extend the statute of limitations, and then we can intentionally let it lapse. And we know this investigation was slow. Here's what everyone said. Shapley said, DOJ slow walked the investigation. Ziegler, Slow walking in the approvals of everything. This happened at the Delaware's Attorney's Office and DOJ tax level. Mr. Sobocinski, the FBI agent, said, I would have liked to see things move faster. Ms. Holly said the same. Every witness we've talked to said this thing was slow walked, and we know why. They slow walked it long enough to let the statute of limitations run so they wouldn't have to get into Burisma. Tell me where I'm wrong.
Will the gentleman yield?
No, I'm asking Mr. Garland the
I
question.
think I've tried to make clear that I don't know the specifics of the investigation. Much of what you are describing occurred during the Trump administration, during a Justice Department appointed by President Trump.
No, it didn't. This is 4.5 years, this investigation. We're talking about the last few years. Your statement was just this year, March 1st, to Senator Grassley.
No, I'm sorry. I was trying to respond to your descriptions of what the IRS agents said about certain
Statute of
things.
limitations is 6 years. That lapsed here in the Biden administration.
On the statute of limitations, will say again that the explanation for why the statute of limitation was lapsed, if it was, has to come from Mr. Weiss.
My time is expired. Let me ask one last question real quick here. Who decided that David Weiss would stay on as U.S. attorney?
Look, this had occurred before I came. Mr. Weiss had been kept on. I promised the...
No, I didn't say, you can walk all through that. I said, who decided? The White House decided.
Weiss?
Right? They serve at the pleasure of the president, right?
Mr. Weiss was...
Joe Biden decided to keep David Weiss as U.S. attorney. You weren't sworn in until March. He was told he was going to stay on in February. Pretty fundamental question. Who decided David Weiss was going to stay as U.S. attorney in Delaware?
Mr. Weiss...
Your time has expired.
Mr. Chairman, your time has expired.
I'm waiting for an answer, and then I'll yield.
Well, you asked the question after your time had expired already. Point of order.
Gentleman can respond, then I'll go to Ms. Jackson-Lee.
Mr. Weiss was the special U.S. attorney from the District of Delaware when I came on. He had been appointed by President Trump. I promised that he would be permitted to stay on for this investigation, and that is what happened.
Gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from New York's recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I believe you misquoted from the transcript of the Senate hearing. I therefore ask unanimous consent to enter into the record the entire transcript of the Senate hearing.
Without objection, but I didn't misquote what Mr. Garland said. Ms. Jackson-Lee from Texas, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. None of the Republicans' goals today include solving Americans' problems of which they are concerned of. There are many reasons, Mr. Attorney General, that prosecutors decline to bring charges. One of those reasons is that they don't have any evidence for a conviction. That is the justice way. That is just in America. So let me raise these questions and concerns with you today. As we all know, Republicans have repeatedly alleged that the DOJ and FBI are conspiring to shield the Biden family from public criticism and giving Hunter Biden special treatment in its investigations. They have demonized law enforcement officials working with this case at every turn, which has directly led to increased threats against FBI officials, law enforcement, of which they pretend to support. I want to place into the record 2 excerpts from recent transcribed interviews, and I would ask that copies be made available to you. The first is from a June interview with Jennifer Moore, FBI's former Executive Assistant Director for Human Resources. She told this committee that FBI had received so many threats that it had to stand up an entire 10-person unit just to deal with them. She said it is unprecedented. It's a number we have never had before. More testimony, pages 202 to 203. The second excerpt is from an interview earlier this month with Thomas Sobocinski, the special agent in charge of FBI's Baltimore field office. Here's what he said. I joined the FBI 25 years ago. I joined for a reason, to protect the American people, uphold the Constitution. I've been to war. My family's been in bad places. My kids have been evacuated from war zones or quasi-war zones. I've been in some bad things. I have accepted that. I'm solely focused on 2 things, and they're not mutually exclusive. The first is, like every investigation, I want to get to a resolution in a fair, apolitical way. The second thing, it's becoming more important and more relevant, is keeping my folks safe. And that part, I've never expected to have to be able to be concerned about keeping families safe, so that for me, this is becoming more and more of a job that I have to do and take away from what I was assigned or signed up to do, which was to investigate and do these things. So when you talk about potential frustrations, with communication. I am personally frustrated with anything that places my employees and their families in enhanced danger. Our children, their children, did not sign up for this. Mr. Attorney General, do you agree that politically charged rhetoric claiming that law enforcement agents, and I have many questions if you could be brief, are corrupt and contribute to this onslaught of threats against public servants?
Okay, as I said in my opening statement, we have had an astounding number of threats against public servants over the last several years. I think that when career public servants in the Justice Department and in election workers and airline crews, when they are singled out, this can lead to threats of violence and actual violence.
Thank
We
you.
have the actual example of an attack on an FBI office by somebody who was incensed by political rhetoric. This does happen. We must not allow that to happen in this country.
Does the rhetoric regarding the Biden case have any basis in reality?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that first part.
Does the rhetoric regarding the Biden case have any basis in reality?
No, it does not.
How does this impact FBI and DOJ employees' ability to do their work? I think you meant specifically FBI and DOJ employees.
As I've already said, the agents of the FBI and the prosecutors understand that criticism comes with their job, and they will continue to do their jobs without fear or favor. But the idea of threatening their safety or that of their families is just abhorrent.
Thank you. And I assume that provisions have had to be in place to protect these agents and their families.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the first part.
I assume that provisions or protections have had to be in place to protect these agents and their families.
Yes, that's correct.
Let me move on. Thank you very much, Mr. General. Let me move on to the fentanyl crisis, and I want to introduce H.R. 4272. But let me just put on the record so that you can probably summarize, and I ask for the indulgence of my chair, but in any event, that the FBI, the DOJ are focused, needlepoint focused, if you will, on the crisis of fentanyl. I want to just raise that for you, and then I just want to follow up with one or two other questions, if you would be able to comment on these collectively. I am dealing with the crisis of human trafficking and the prioritizing of America's children. They are under siege. And the level of child sexual abuse materials generating into human trafficking, and I want to put HR 30 on the record, indicates from ICAC that there are 99,000 IP cases where they're enticing children, and maybe only 1% of them being investigated. I'd like your comment on that. And finally, in the approach of of Yom Kippur, to emphasize the work that is hopefully still being doing with anti-Semitism, attacks on immigrants, and African Americans and Latinos. If you would answer those questions, fentanyl, the human trafficking, and then domestic terrorism.
These are all horrendous problems propagated by people who are truly evil. We are fighting the fentanyl scourge in every possible way, starting with the precursors in China, to the labs in Mexico, to the cartels that are bringing the drugs into the United States, to their networks in the United States, to the streets of America. And we will continue to do that with every resource that Congress gives us. Human smuggling and sex trafficking are obviously abhorrent. The Justice Department has task forces on both of these subjects and have brought many, many cases on these subjects. The idea of putting sexually explicit material about children on the web is another area that we are continuing to investigate and to prosecute and to ask the social media to take down from their sites.
Gentlelady's time has expired. The gentleman floor is recognized for 5 minutes.
I guess I'm just wondering, Mr. Attorney General, has anyone at the department told President Biden to knock it off with Hunter? I mean, you guys are charging Hunter Biden on some crimes, investigating him on others. You've got the president bringing Hunter Biden around to state dinners. Has anyone told him to knock it off?
Our job in the Justice Department is to pursue our cases without reference to what's happening in the outside world.
Just yes or no? Have you done that?
That is what we do.
So it's a no?
No one that I know of has spoken to the White House about the Hunter Biden case.
I'm wondering
Of
then,
course not.
okay, I got it. So Hunter Biden is selling art to pay for his $15,000 a month rent in Malibu. How can you guarantee that the people buying that art aren't doing so to gain favor with the president?
The job of the Justice Department is to investigate criminal allegations. You have
Are you
information.
investigating this? I mean, someone who bought Hunter Biden's art ended up with a prestigious appointment to a federal position. Doesn't it look weird that he's become this immediate success in the art world as his dad is president of the United States? Isn't that odd?
I'm not going to comment about any specific.
Not going to comment, not going to investigate. So
right.
Hunter Biden associate Devin Archer told us that Hunter sold the appearance of access to then Vice President Biden. Are you confident he has stopped doing that?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question.
Hunter Biden associate Devin Archer told us that Hunter sold the appearance of access to then Vice President Biden. Are you confident he has stopped?
I'm going to say again that all these matters are within the purview of Mr. Weiss. I have not interfered with them, and I
Yeah, but
do
if you were
not.
confident that he had stopped, you could.
And I do
you could
not
probably
intend
tell
to
us
interfere with
he
it.
had. So it was a lot of Chinese money that was working its way through these shell companies into the accounts of the Biden family. So the China initiative was set up during the Trump administration at the Department of Justice to go after the malign influence of the Chinese Communist Party. And the Biden Justice Department dissolved the China initiative. So I guess I'm wondering, does the department have any documents that would detail the basis for why you got rid of the China initiative that President Trump had set up?
The Assistant Attorney General of the National Security Division gave a long speech which explained that. He has testified before Congress several times. We'd be happy to provide you with.
What's the basis? Just tell us all now. Why was the China initiative dissolved?
What the Assistant Attorney General said was that we face attacks from 4 nation states: North Korea, China, Russia, and Iran, and that we need to focus our attention on the broad range of these attacks. Sometimes we don't know.
Wait a second. Are you saying that North Korea has the same malign influence risk to the United States as the Chinese Communist Party? Are you trying to represent there's some parity there? Because here's what it looks like. It looks like the Chinese gave all this money to the Bidens, and then you guys came in and got rid of the China initiative, and it was successful. Like, I saw one rationale that you guys got rid of the China initiative because it was racial profiling. But one of the people you convicted was a guy named Charles Lieber, who was a Harvard professor taking $50,000 a month to do China's bidding and give them whatever research was being done. Are you aware of the millions of dollars that moved through Rob Walker's shell companies from Chinese Communist Party entities into Biden family bank accounts? Are you aware of that?
There were a lot of questions that you just asked. Let me start with the first one about North Korea. North Korea is a dangerous actor, both kinetically and with respect to cyber.
But not on par with China. I'm on the Armed Services Committee,
I'm not in the
Mr.
business
Attorney
right
General.
now of
It makes you look unserious to suggest
May I
that.
answer your question or not?
Answer the question about whether or not you know about all the millions of dollars that
So
moved
you
through
don't
Rob
want me to
Walker's
answer about North Korea?
I already know the answer, and so does everyone. They're not the same risk as China. So let's get on to serious questions and serious answers. Do you know about the money that moved through Rob Walker's shell companies, yes or no?
As I have said repeatedly, I have left these matters to Mr. Weiss. I've not
Blissfully
intruded.
ignorant.
I've not interfered.
Blissfully
I've
ignorant
not
to these
tried to
things.
find out what he knows.
It's like you're looking the other way on purpose because everybody knows this stuff's happening. And you know what? People don't pay bribes to not get something in return. Right? The China initiative resulted in the convictions of a Harvard professor, of someone at Monsanto. So we were working against the Chinese. They paid the Bidens, and now you're sitting here telling me that North Korea is the big threat. I got to get to this one thing on January 6th. So did the FBI lose count of the number of paid informants on January 6th?
Let me answer your question about China.
I want you to answer this question. I only get 5 minutes. You've already sort of, I think, screwed the pooch on China. So January 6th, did you lose count of the number of federal assets? Did you lose count and order an audit?
Gentleman's time has expired.
I get an answer to the question of did they lose count?
No, let him answer the question.
Time has expired. The Attorney General can respond.
China is the most aggressive, most dangerous adversary that
Attorney
the
General, I think
United
that-
States faces, and we are doing everything within our power to rebut that, to stop that, to prevent their invasions, both kinetic both, and through cyberspace, and we will continue to do
If someone
that.
gave that answer in your courtroom when you were a judge, you would tell them they were being
Mr. Chairman,
non-responsive and you would direct them to answer the question.
Point of order, Your Honor?
Time is,
Badgering the witness.
Point of
Time
order,
has
please.
expired.
I got it. I was
You like Your
laughing.
Honor? You want to stick with that?
Yeah, I was getting
Okay.
laughed at to call me Your Honor.
Point of order either way.
Okay, I understand that too.
All right.
But the gentleman asked his question before his time expired. The Attorney General did not respond to the gentleman's question. I was hoping he would respond to the question about the confidential human sources on January 6th. He didn't respond to that. I'm sure we're going to get an answer to that later.
Of course,
Now-
Mr. Chairman,
now
there were
recognize
8
the
questions
gentleman-
before that he was not given a chance to answer.
Understand,
So
but-
the witness might have thought.
But the witness doesn't,
Two
Mr. Chairman,
chances
point of order. The
question.
witness does not control the
Hang
time.
on, exactly right. Members control the time. If they want to switch their question and focus on one more question that they'd like an answer to, I want to give the witness a chance to respond to that final question that Mr. Gates asked. He didn't respond to it. Someone else is going to ask it, I'm sure. We now recognize the gentleman from Tennessee for 5 minutes.
Thank you, sir. I'll just follow up a few of the questions we were asked here. Did Devin Archer not say Joe Biden did nothing wrong?
Be clear, I only know about Mr. Archer from newspaper reports. I want to be clear that I kept my promise to not involve myself in this
Okay,
investigation.
and I'll state it. He said Joe Biden did nothing wrong. Secondly, did you say that President Trump appointed Weiss, who then you appointed?
Yes, President Trump appointed Mr. Weiss as United States Attorney.
So that should take care of that issue. And they say the department's been weaponized. Wasn't there an investigation of Mr. Gates and you didn't prosecute him?
Justice Department does not make comments about its
Well, it
investigation.
shows you we're not weaponized. If we were weaponized, we'd have done it. That was a beautiful exchange there, and it shows we didn't do that. You are the nation's chief law enforcement officer, and I appreciate that. And law enforcement's one of our government's fundamental functions. Crime is growing too much in this country and in my city of Memphis as well. We need law enforcement to be effective, swift, and fair. I'd like to focus my questions on what actually affects the American people. Crime. How do we get smarter law enforcement requiring smart resource of allocations, not about funding or less funding, but the right funding for the right programs, and see that that happens? Memphis, as hiring has become more difficult, we've lowered our standards to get more officers. That's not the way to do it. The COPS program is helping us review the policy and procedures, and I thank you, the COPS program, for doing that. But what can Department of Justice do to help see that law enforcement is more efficient and more effective?
So the key to this is our partnership, the FBI, DEA, Marshals, ATF's partnership at every local level with local and state law enforcement, in task forces, in discussions to target the most dangerous criminals in those communities, but at the same time to engage the communities to help engender community trust in law enforcement. Everyone who's prosecuted violent crime cases, and that includes me, knows that you need the trust of the community in order to get witnesses. We in the Justice Department are helping our state and local colleagues do just that. The funding you described from the COPS office and in the Office of Justice Programs allows us to give money to state and local police organizations that are having trouble with recruitment and retention and promotion of law officers, and helps them make their departments respectful of constitutional rights, and at the same time effective in the investigation and prosecution of criminal law violations.
Thank you for those activities, those programs through COPS. You've also reinstituted patterns and practices investigations of certain police departments, and Memphis is one of them, and I thank you for doing that. Can you share with us how important those pilot programs are and how they can improve policing?
Yes, Congress has authorized the Justice Department to conduct pattern or practice investigations when they have a reasonable belief in that there has been a pattern of unconstitutional behavior in a police department. We are careful to select those cases where we think there is such a pattern. We make those investigations. We then work with the law enforcement agencies in the cities. Our hope is to come to a consent decree that will lead to a better, more efficient, and more constitutional police department. We have been successful in all of our cases to date in reaching consent agreements.
Thank you, sir. You were part of announced bringing of charges, federal charges against the 5 officers who killed Tyree Nichols in Memphis, and I thank you for that. We need that federal charge, and we need our department looked at. If there's a shutdown of the federal government, how will that affect the Department of Justice and affect policing in local communities?
Well, I haven't done a complete calculation on the effects of a shutdown and the difference between which employees are indispensable under the statute and which ones not. It will certainly disrupt all of our normal programs, including our grant programs to state and local law enforcement, and to our ability to conduct our normal efforts with respect to the entire scope of our activities, including helping state and locals fight violent crime.
Thank you, sir, and Happy New Year, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman, Mr. McClintock from California, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Attorney General, looking again at the appointment of Jack Smith and David Weiss, this double standard of justice couldn't be more glaring. Jack Smith was deeply involved in the IRS scandal that targeted conservative political groups to harass. His malicious prosecution of former Governor McDonnell was unanimously overturned by the U.S. Supreme Court. Chief Justice Roberts rebuked Smith directly for attempting to criminalize political activity. You appointed him to prosecute Joe Biden's chief rival for the presidency. And then we have the appointment of David Weiss. Weiss deliberately allowed the statute of limitations to run out on any charges that could have implicated Joe Biden in influence peddling. He originally offered Hunter Biden a sweetheart deal that was ultimately upended by the court, and he's the one you appointed to pursue the charges that could implicate Joe Biden. That leads me to only 2 explanations, either corruption or incompetence. So which is it?
Those are the kind of questions that judges would rule out of order.
I'm sure you would. Which is it?
Look, I said before, and I will say again, Mr. Weiss was the Republican-appointed United States Attorney appointed by President Trump.
Do you at least see the obvious double standard applied in these 2 appointments?
Mr. Weiss was a Republican appointee. Mr. Smith is not registered to either party. His entire career was as a career prosecutor.
I'm not asking what their party registrations are. I'm asking about their records and how those records would commend them to the appointments that you made. This is a question of judgment, and it's a question of motive. What was motivating you to do this?
Mr. Smith had a nationwide reputation for integrity and for appropriate prosecution. His work can be measured by what he actually has filed. Everyone in the country can see the indictments.
How can you
that he has
say that
charged.
after he was so heavily implicated in the IRS scandal or the rebuke that the Supreme Court gave and many other examples? But let me go on. We've had 2 IRS whistleblowers inform Congress of attempts by senior Justice Department officials to obstruct the criminal investigation into millions of dollars of ill-gotten and undeclared income to Hunter Biden. They noted several deviations by department officials from normal process that provided preferential treatment, in this case to Hunter Biden, a direct quote, including allowing the statute of limitations to lapse, requesting IRS and FBI management level investigative communications, prohibiting investigators from referring to the big guy or dad in witness interviews, excluding the investigative team from meetings with defense counsel, and notifying defense counsel of pending search warrants. The U.S. Attorney's Office even tipped off the Bidens of an impending search of a storage unit where their records were being kept. Now, that sounds an awful lot like obstruction of justice to me. Was that coming from you or from somebody else?
I'm sorry, I don't was that coming from you? I don't understand the question.
All of the actions that your employees took to obstruct the investigation of Hunter Biden and the earnings that he made and the taxes he failed to declare, their source, and ultimately who they were paid to.
I'm going to say again, with respect to the Hunter Biden investigation, that it has been and still is in the hands of Mr. Weiss, an appointee of President Trump. I don't know about all of these allegations. Some of them appear to have been from the period when the Attorney General appointed by President Trump was still the Attorney General.
Do these charges trouble you at all?
Mr. Weiss will have an opportunity to explain the decisions.
Well, you're
that
the
he
guy
made.
in charge. Does this trouble you?
I have intentionally not involved myself in the facts of the case, not because I'm trying to get out of responsibility, but because I'm trying to pursue my responsibility.
Your FBI director testified before this committee of an uptick in, quote, known or suspected terrorists coming across the southern border. And he told us that the southern border represents a massive security threat. Those were his words, a massive security threat. Do you agree?
I am perfectly happy to align myself with the director of the FBI.
Well, why is it then that we, senior administration, rescind the Trump-era orders that had secured that border? I mean, we've seen an exponential increase in suspected terrorists.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The witness can respond if he chooses.
This is the answer to this question about immigration law is an extremely long answer. I would defer to the Department of Homeland Security, which is responsible for the physical security and about first contact at the border. With
Well, we've tried to get answers from him, and he doesn't give them to us.